Good afternoon, group. Dr. DeVito. This is Eddie Knighton with my Module 2 response on racism and ethnicity. Um, I watch all the videos, good things. It seems like everyone's on the same page. I do see a similarity between the videos to where it just sort of goes through the reading and kind of lifts a few things out and bullet points them. And it seems that the whole summation of it comes around to awareness. So I definitely agree that in terms of like racism and acknowledging our white supremacy, we need to be aware. If there's blood in the roots, there's blood in the branches. My wicked old grandmother used to say that, and that we should definitely own up. Don't say things like I've never owned a slave. Everyone knows that you've owned a slave. Recognizing what is appropriate. Owning up, being aware. And on a more personal note, I like to address empathy. What helps me is, hospitality. That's the way I approach everything in my professional life. I treat everyone as if they're a potential customer. And this especially helps when you have more difficult people. If you do that, then it helps you to contextualize equality and also to keep emotions separate from passions and empathies. You can have passion and empathy for social justice issue without it overwhelming your emotions and making you make bad emotional or say bad emotional things. I sort of approach racism the way I approach history and culture. I think that every aspect of culture is secondary to economics. With race slavery in the colonies, that was a product of mercantilism. We needed, or they needed the labor, and then they justified the horrors of slavery through tradition, culture, and religions. You can see that later in the abolition movement when it became cheaper to literally pay a person a minimum wage than to shelter and continuously feed a person, especially through old age. And speculatively, especially in like World War I, when women entered the job markets and started having consumer dollars, I think a lot of civil rights is actually controlled by the inclusion of target groups into the labor and consumer markets. But, that's speculatively and definitely subjective. So I'm actually rather optimistic about like racism in the future. Currently now we're very racially divided. It doesn't look so good from here, but like in last semester's EDL 551, I think it was, we read about identity developments. Everyone in here's probably read them. And I remember reading Helm's model of white identity development. It came in two sequential phases to where it talked about abandonment of racism, where we relinquished the idealized notions of whiteness and we started acknowledging our complicity in maintaining a racial society. And then the second part of that, you have the evolution of non-racist identity, which is a deeper reflection and attempts to interact with people of other groups. I remember in that paragraph, it said something about like white people needing to devise a way to be white without being evil. Which, if you believe any of the tenets of this particular model here, I would say that you have to reject the idea that whites are oblivious. I don't think that whites are oblivious about racism and white privilege. I think even the most racist white person knows. They know that they have it better. And they know that their privilege has come at the sacrifice of millions of other people. It's just the fact that we're in a political climate to where they're not going to own up to that because no one wants to be evil. I think from a psychological standpoint, we can all understand that. I come to another part that really blew my mind last semester. I'd like to discuss briefly. It was crossing Fagan Smith's model of inside Fagan in Smith's model of black identity development, which is a identity model that went through the entire lifespan of a black person as they develop. And there was two things in there. One was racial salience, which refers to the importance or significance of race in a person's approach to life. and internalized racism, which is the negativity that a person could have about themselves and their own race because of their culture. In terms of racial salience, I don't necessarily believe that that's specifically for black people. I think we all have a racial salience, how important it is to us. Because of white privilege, my racial salience is very, very low. So, the controversy comes, however, though, when the book, or that book that it was in, Crossan Fagan Smith, stated that a person with low racial salience typically develops faster through the model and typically ends up being more economically successful. They have less internalized racism, and they just overall essentially have less existential issues in their life. A question that I asked last semester, and I was very surprised that it was met in class with absolutely no answer, was, well, if that's the case, how can we, going back to my idea about economics, how can we include or be more inclusive? I'm careful not to use the word assimilation because through a social justice lens, that may make it sound like I'm saying to disregard their culture and in their history, which I'm not. But I'm just saying in terms of like if we want people to do better and we want equality for all, I do think that will come in terms of economics. So how do we do that while simultaneously helping them cherish and appreciate and uphold their own culture? And another question is like, if we want to head toward a society to eliminate white supremacy and white privilege and just minimize racism in general, shouldn't it be a goal of ours to lower all racial salience? Because the less we care about race, the less we care about race. I mean, that just seems like good common math to me. But I know that that's probably a bastardization of that model and the understanding of those two models, and in some way still trying to subconsciously reinforce my own white privilege and white guilt. Although as a Buddhist, I don't really walk around with too much guilt. Sorry about that. Anyway, I would be interested to hear any thoughts, and I hope you guys have a good week and see you next class.